Hey everyone, Alex Kaiju Fans coming at you guys with another video. Today I'm going to be doing a tier list on my favorite Ultraman monsters. Now for me personally, the original Ultraman is one of my favorite series. And I personally love a lot of the monsters in it. But without further ado, let's just get right into it. First of all, we're going to be starting off with Telesdon. I'm going to put Telesdon in A tier. I actually really like Telesdon. I think the only thing that drags down Telesdon for me is the roar, but otherwise the design is solid. I didn't know until a few months ago, but Telesdon is actually a worm. Pretty interesting. But the episode itself is wonderful. I love the mystery. The best way I would compare Telesdon would be similar to a sense in that you don't see him in the first couple minutes of the episode. He's very mysterious, and he's built up towards. And the villains around the episode, the underground people, are very interesting in my opinion because they're humans, and yet they have this monster deep from the bellows of Earth that is going to destroy everything. And the whole fight with Ultraman Telesdon is interesting too. Bolton 2, S tier. I really like Bolton 2. Bolton 2, I think, is criminally underrated. The reason why I personally really enjoy Bolton 2 is because the whole episode is just a masterpiece for me. Everything is very interesting. I remember that, watching the original Ultraman for the first time, and seeing the monitor come on, and Bolton 2, and he had returned, was very intriguing, because this was the first instance, if I recall, of any character in Ultraman returning. And with Bolton 2, he did not disappoint in my opinion. He literally tricked the original Ultraman by thinking he was going to be on planet R, when in fact this would lead to an opportunity to attack Earth. This episode also allowed for a great character development for Ide, as he was able to show his scientific prowess, as well as him having the courage to stand up to monsters. The only thing about Bolton 2 that I don't really like per se is not really with the character, but with the episode scripting. Bolton 2 nearly defeats Ultraman Planet R, then Ultraman kills it, and after teleporting to Earth, a technique that says to use much of his energy in his color timer, also manages to kill the second Bolton 2, and yet Ultraman's color timer doesn't blink at all. It's pretty interesting, but kind of odd in my opinion. Greenmons, he's a C for me. I do have appreciation for Greenmon's episode, but again, he's not really one of my favorites. I think Greenmons is okay, and I like the episode for the cinematography and horror aspect, but otherwise, he's pretty average for me. Let's see, this is Zeton, Alien Zeton. I'm going to put Alien Zeton in C. Alien Zeton's in C for me because he doesn't really have that big of a role. However, I do like the battle with him, the Science Patrol, and his huge alien fleet. And when he attacked the Science Patrol HQ, it was a very intense time, in my opinion. Gabora is going in B for me. I actually like Gabora. I think he has a really awesome design. I think his episode's pretty neat, and his fight was absolutely wonderful in my opinion. Hopefully Gabora returns one day, but otherwise there's not really much to say about Gabora because he's pretty run-of-the-mill in my opinion. Gavidon's going D. I'm sorry for any Gavidon fans out there, but Gavidon hasn't really been one of my favorites. I think his episode is pretty lackluster, the pacing is pretty odd. I do feel bad when Gavidon does die, however, it's not really an episode I'll come back to rewatch from time to time. Bolton, I'll put Bolton in A. I actually really like Bolton. I think Bolton's pretty wonderful. He's a very unique Ultraman opponent, one of the most unique in my opinion, and overall Bolton is what really sets Ultraman apart from, say, Godzilla or Gamera, because he's literally fourth dimensional, and that's pretty awesome. Pestar's in D. I'm sorry for any Pestar fans. I found Pestar to be very underwhelming because Pestar literally shows up one day, and that's the episode. There's no origin for him. There's not really much of anything to go off of with Pestar. He also dies pretty quickly. He doesn't really fight Ultraman. He just gets killed by the Science Patrol, and then he comes back for a moment, only for Ultraman to literally kill him after one fire blast. It's just pretty odd in my opinion. Yeah, I understand that Pestar couldn't fight Ultraman because the suit was too elaborate, but I still found the pacing and everything to just be very awkward. Chandler's going into C. I think Chandler's a C monster because Chandler is just a jobber. If you've ever watched wrestling, there's usually a wrestler that's the biggest one and the strongest, and what the company will do is that they'll have him fight somebody to make them look weak, but to make the main wrestler look stronger. That's essentially what Chandler is. He's a jobber. Not really much to him outside of that. Alright, Zerab. This is the illusion of Zerab, I believe. Zerab Illusion, or the goat. Yeah, this is the Illusion Zerab. Zerab 2. He's gonna go on D. He doesn't really do anything. He just shows up for about a minute, and that's it. Not really much to go off of. It's not that I don't like Zerab 2, it's just that there's really nothing to go off of, and it would be kind of unfair to place him higher than episode monsters who actually fought. At least with Chandler, he fought Red King, but Zerab 2 really did nothing. Draco's in B for me. I like Draco's design a lot, and I like the fact that he returns in the Dronimon episode, but outside of that, he's not really my favorite. But I do like him. That's why I put him in B. Bemular, he's also going in B. The only thing about Bemular for me is that he's essentially aquatic, or not really aquatic, but he's essentially Godzilla from space. Because he has the atomic ray, similar roar. The reason why I don't have Bemular higher is because his design is a little bit odd for me. It's a very thin, narrow design with some very skinny arms and lanky legs. I just don't think that Bemular is the best design, and that really shows in a lot of his fights, especially in the original series. But overall, I just put Bemular in B. I still give him credit for being the first Ultraman monster, and for having a unique aspect in the fact that he's similar to Ultraman for traveling on a sphere of light. But otherwise, outside of that, I can't really put him in S. Hydra, I think Hydra's okay. I'm going to put Hydra in C. It's not really my favorite episode to rewatch, but I do remember it having a lot more of an emotional aspect. But overall, Hydra is just pretty average to me. Camular is also average to me. He's not really one of my favorites. I do like the episode and how it's not even Ultraman that kills him. He just goes into a volcano and dies. But otherwise, outside of that, there's not really too much to Camular, honestly. Let's see, Antler. Antler is going into A for me. The reason why I have Antler in A is because he really established the lore of Ultraman. He really expanded upon the mythos of the series. Antler also had a very tough fight with Ultraman, and Antler was even defeated by Ultraman. He was actually killed by the Blue Stone, showing that Ultraman may have potentially even lost to Antler. I think this is Goldon. Goldon's a C. He's very average to me, just like Camular, one-time monster. The thing is with Goldon is that I like the fact that a lot of his episodes took place underground, but otherwise he doesn't really stick out to me too much. Coronia, though, Coronia is going into S. I actually love Coronia. The reason why is because Coronia has one of the best fights in Ultraman in my opinion, the original Ultraman series. It's very elaborate, well choreographed, lots of physical aspects of it, and even outside of that, Coronia features a very eerie scenario around him. He's very scary, especially when he's in his human form. It's almost like a horror movie. The whole episode around Coronia could have been a horror movie. And when they're discovering the origins of the weird plant monster found in South America in the Amazon jungle, it's just very eerie and kind of scary in my opinion. Gango's a C. Gango isn't really my favorite either. He's just pretty average in my opinion. I do think he's pretty alright, but again, I remember watching Gango's episode and not wanting him to die, in which whether or not he dies is a little bit up to interpretation. He is kind of floating in space, unless Ultraman blew him up in outer space. But overall, what I do like about Gango is that his fight scene with the original Ultraman has an elaborate set, but outside of that, it's just pretty average. Magular is a C. It's not that I don't really like Magular, but it's the same sense with Chandler in the sense that he's just kind of a jobber. He's just kind of there. And that's really all there is to it. Actually, I'm going to put Magular in D, because Magular didn't even die to Ultraman or another monster. He actually just died to the Science Patrol, which I guess is pretty impressive, but at the end of the day, he's just kind of another one-off Baragon suit, honestly. Next is Ragan. Ragan is going into B. I actually like Ragan. The thing is with Ragan is that his episode has some very high stakes, and I do like a lot of the fighting with him, but what I think drags Ragan down is that he has some awkward moments, in particular with the dancing. I felt that kind of took away from everything. I get that was a unique way to try and defeat Ragan, but I felt it just really took away from the tension of the episode. But overall, I think Ragan is a pretty solid monster. He is a returning monster from Ultra Q, fun fact. Jiras. Jiras is going into C. But I'm giving him as high C. I like Jiras because he's unique in the sense that he's a created monster, if I recall, no other monster in Ultraman is really created by somebody, but Jiras was created entirely by a scientist, which is pretty unique in my opinion. But also on top of that, Jiras is just in C for me because he's just, if you were to look at it on the surface level, he's pretty generic. However, if I were to look at him from a nostalgia and baseline level, I would put him at a B, because the fact that Jiras is a Godzilla suit makes for the interesting fourth wall novelty that Ultraman indirectly fought Godzilla. But as an Ultraman monster, he's at a C level for me. Niranga. Niranga is at he's at a B for me. I put Niranga as a B monster. I do like Niranga a lot, but his episode in Ultraman was pretty interesting. I might put him in A later. It really depends on just the tone of mood. Niranga's either A or B for me. Skydon. Skydon's a D for me. I'm sorry, but I don't really enjoy Skydon's episode too much. I think it focuses a little bit too much on comedy, and it's just kind of a awkward episode for me to watch. The pacing is all over the place for me sometimes in the Skydon episode. Overall, I feel like Skydon is just kind of, he's just kind of whatever to me. Let's see. Sibozu. Sibozu is also going into D. Again, I know that Sibozu is one of the more sad monsters, but Sibozu is kind of a monster that I don't really watch his episode too much either. I think he's pretty okay. The only thing I have a problem is that Sibozu's design seems pretty odd to me because I wish his tail was a little bit longer. It just seems that he has a very short tail with his really big body structure. And Sibozu he's just kind of there. I don't really care for him too much. Bolton 1 though, Bolton 1's going into S. Bolton 1's a genius Ultraman monster. Or alien. He's the very first alien, and the whole aspect and atmosphere around him is very eerie, very scary stuff. And I also really like the fact that Bolton has an aerial battle with Ultraman, one of the first aerial battles in Ultraman, or the first one, and even to this day, it still holds up very well in my opinion, even for the time in 1966. It set the standard for main rivals for Ultraman, and for aliens for future shows. Let's see right here. I think this is Zaragas. Zaragas is going into... he's a C-level monster for me. I think Zaragas is pretty okay. I do like the aspect that he has the blinding light that he can use, but otherwise, there's not really much more to him. He's pretty standard. Gubila is actually a B for me, believe it or not. I actually really like Gubila. I love his roar. I think the episode was very unique in the fact that it focused on the underwater base. There was a lot of tension throughout the episode, not even from just Gubira, but from the outside threats of the water leaking in, I believe, in the base. It's been a while since I watched the episode, but I remember there was a lot of tension in that episode. And Gubira's fight with Ultraman was absolutely intense, in my opinion, because when Gubira catches the Ultra Slash, I did not expect that, because I didn't think anybody could catch that. Gamora. Gamora's going into B. Yeah, Gamora isn't really... Oops, I actually put him in front of Gubira. Gamora's going into B for me. Believe it or not, but I'm not the biggest Gamora fan. I think Gamora has a pretty bland design. He's just a brown dinosaur with horns. What also hurts Gamora for me is his roar. I think his roar is a little bit tiresome if you hear it over and over and over. But what also hurts Gamora for me is that his fight scene has no music. So when you're watching him fight Ultraman, it's just the sound effects, which is pretty okay and all, but sometimes I wish that they added music sometimes, because that's what really makes the Ultraman fights memorable, is with the music. Gamora is just a pretty awkward episode, and the whole episode focuses on a child, which I guess is pretty interesting, but it kind of takes away from Gamora in my opinion. And overall, I think Gamora in this episode of Ultraman is just pretty okay. That's why I put him at B. Bolton 3, he's a D. Again, it's nothing against Bolton 3, it's just that I can't literally rank him higher than monsters who have entire episodes dedicated to him. Same thing with Giant Fuji, too. Giant Fuji is pretty okay, unique concept of a human being giant, but outside of that, that's just the novelty of it. Let's see, this is the Vines. Vines are in D too. They're not even really monsters, they're just more of plants that serve as obstacles. I guess they count as monsters, but they're not really going to be memorable, because they also appear in Ultra 7, if I recall. I think this is Zamballer, or Zamboller. I think Zamboller's C. Pretty average monster. I remember that this episode is pretty interesting because they introduced a new Science Patrol member who wasn't from France, when instead they were from India. I think the monster has a pretty interesting roar, but outside of that, it's pretty run-of-the-mill for me. The Mummy isn't really one of my favorite characters in Ultraman. It's not that I don't like his design, it's just that he's pretty okay to me. The whole episode with the Mummy and Dodongo were just not really my favorites. Jamila, however, Jamila's going into A. Although Jamila isn't an episode I rewatch the most, Jamila's episode is very emotional. I think if there is an episode of Ultraman that some people should watch, one of them that I would recommend, depending on who they are, would be Jamila's episode, because it's very plot and character orientated, and it takes itself a lot more seriously. And it's definitely a product of the time, considering this was 1966, this was during the prime time of the space race. So I think that Jamila holds a lot of relevancy. And I think that Jamila's episode is also timeless in that sense, because space exploration is still a modern day phenomenon. Overall, I think Jamila is A tier. Ultraman's S tier. I love the original Ultraman design. It's just a really flawless design. Now, however, I do think that the A design's a little bit odd, but I do like the B and the C designs. And just because it's Ultraman, I put him in S tier because he's a really excellent Ultraman in my opinion. Mephiles is going into S for me. I really like Mephiles. I think he has a very interesting plot. I loved a lot of his magical abilities, and I really liked the fact that he was more passive than the other aliens. And he had a pretty good reason for why he wanted to take over Earth. He was very selfless in his crusade for his people, but at the same time he resorted to violence overall, which I like Mephiles a lot. Let's see, this is Keela. I think Keela is pretty okay. Keela is not really one of my favorite Ultraman monsters, but on a good day he's a B tier, but on this day he's kind of a C tier for me. This is the original Zerab. I can tell because of the brown body design, but otherwise the way how the picture is cropped, you're probably going to be able to tell it's Zerab, but that is Zerab. I'm putting Zerab in S because Zerab set the tone for Ultraman and other series after it. He was the first one to really replicate Ultraman in the sense that he became a fake version or even an evil version of Ultraman, which is something that Ultraman did even before Kamen Rider or Godzilla. And Zerab as a character is very intelligent and conniving. I liked how he came off as humanity's friend, as their brother. Very interesting angle for an Ultraman alien. Gamma Kujira, though, I'm putting Gamma Kujira in D. Not one of my favorite monsters at all. He's probably one of my least favorite Ultraman monsters. I think the suit is just really awkward. The tongue feature is just weird. The whole Pearl storyline with Fuji was just pointless to me. You could skip this episode of Gamma Kujira, and in my opinion, you probably wouldn't miss that much. Yeah. Aboris, though. Aboris is going into S. I love Aboris. I think Aboris has just a classic design. It's very awesome in my opinion. Even though it's just kind of blue, green, red king, I love Aboris' roar. I love his powers, how he's able to freeze things. And I love his fight with the original Ultraman because he was such a tough monster. He almost beat Ultraman too. He was able to withstand multiple attacks from the Specium Ray. Let's see. Now we got the original Red King. The original Red King is, he's an A tier for me. I really like Red King 1. However, I think that Red King 1, what drags him down for me is the fact that he gets taken out easily by Ultraman. He gets killed relatively quickly, and for that reason, I think that he's not really the biggest threat in Ultraman, but I do like the fact that he takes on other monsters, and I love his roar. His design is pretty awesome too. He's a pretty solid monster. Geronimon. Geronimon's a B for me. I was going to put Geronimon in A or S, but I think what drags down Geronimon for me is that Geronimon doesn't really do too much fighting. He relies too much on his feathers. The episode around him is also a little bit more comedic, when it's supposed to be a kind of end of the world, all monsters are being resurrected kind of tone. I really wish Geronimo would return and get a new sort of episode around him to where he gets to really unleash his full potential. But until then, Geronimo's a B monster for me. Not to say I don't enjoy his episode. I still enjoy his episode. It's just that I think Geronimo isn't the greatest thing ever. Let's see. Dodongo. That's a D level for me. I have Dodongo in D because he's pretty eh to me. He's very eh to me. I really remember feeling sad for Dodongo when he was suffering in agony and finally died, but his episode isn't very enjoyable to me. Saigo, I believe this is Saigo. Saigo's going into... he's going into D. Saigo falls into the same category as Magular, in the sense that he's just kind of a jobber. He just gets killed by the Science Patrol and that's really it. Gezora is a C for me. I actually kind of like Gezora, but again, he's really one of my favorites. I just like Gezora because he has a very elaborate fight stage with Ultraman, similar to Gengo. However, the monster himself, Gezora, isn't really one of my favorites. This is the Underground Lady. Similar to Alien Zeton, I'm going to put the Underground people in C, because they definitely did a very good job of setting up the mystery around Ultraman, Teleston. Dada. Dada is going into A for me. Believe it or not, but I really like Dada. I think Dada has one of my favorite episodes. Or actually, you know what? Unpopular opinion. Dada's going into S. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Dada's going into S. I love Dada. One of the most memorable Ultraman episodes for me, in my opinion. Gygus. Gygus is he's a C. But he's kind of a low C. I almost put him at D, but I put Gygus in C because he's just kind of there. He's not really one of my favorites, but I think he's okay. Pigmon. Pigmon. Yikes. Pigmon's a D. Yeah, Pigmon is really one of my favorites, at least in the original Ultraman. His design is kind of odd in my opinion. I just find Pigmon to be a little bit annoying at times. Red King 2, however, Red King 2 is S. Similar to Bolton 2, I love Red King 2. Red King 2 displays a lot of what made Red King great in my opinion, but increases it more. Red King 2 has the monster aspect where he takes on Gygus and Arako. He also has the tensions of Ragan in the sense that he has an atomic bomb that could blow up. But Red King 2, what makes him better for me than Red King 1 is that Red King 2 almost defeats Ultraman. He puts up a very good fight against Ultraman and causes him to resort to new powers just to literally defeat him, which I think is wonderful. Zoffy is a... you see, it's really hard to rank Zoffy because he doesn't really do much. He doesn't fight anybody. He just talks. But I guess I'll put Zoffy at an A, just for participation, right? Zeton's S. Zeton's awesome in my opinion. I love Zeton, one of my favorites. This is Cameraman. You see, Cameraman didn't really do too much. So if I was ranking it based on Ultra Q, Cameraman would go in A or S if this was Ultra Q. But because this is Ultraman, he's in D, because Cameraman doesn't really do anything in the Ultraman series. Woo! I'm sorry, Woo fans, but Woo is also a C. Not really one of my favorite episodes. I do admit it's a little bit sad, but I enjoy Jamila's aspect a little bit more. And last but not least, Benila. Benila's going into C too. I think Benila is kind of an ugly design. But yeah, overall, that's my list. What do you guys think about my list? Do you guys agree? I'm probably going to get a ton of people who don't agree with me. Either way though, how would you rank these monsters? Like, comment, share, subscribe, and see you guys next video. Bye.